What is up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls? It's your boy Goblin, and today we're coming in with a hoot and a holler. Today I'm trying out a kind of different video where what we're going to be doing is taking a look back at some of my older videos and talking about and breaking down the top 5 crackheads from all of my videos. I'm talking about all of my past content. In the description, there's going to be timestamps as well as links to original videos where I talked about these people. So if you guys want to skip around or are looking for information on a certain character from one of my past stories, odds are that character is probably going to be mentioned in this video. This isn't going to be like a formal fluid story. It's simply going to be a top 5, baby. And we're going to talk about each one, give a little brief information kind of summarizing these crackheads from my videos, and then giving a status update about how they're doing nowadays. You know, where are they at? What's the last thing I heard on them? Because some of these people, like old folk, I have some new information on. But either way, hope you guys enjoy. Let's dive right into it. So, the first character that I want to touch on here is from one of my recent videos, Crackhead Joe. You can't go wrong talking about Crackhead Joe. Now, Crackhead Joe, out of all the people on this list, was one of the friendliest crackheads ever. This guy was just a ball to be around. And for those of you guys who have been watching my videos for a while, and maybe you haven't seen the Crackhead Joe video, that will be linked in the description. I actually have a whole video specifically about this guy. But basically, he was like a middle-aged dude who somehow met my good friend Ashton while he was in high school and selling drugs. And he would buy off my friend Ashton, and I would happen to come along to all the serves all the time, right? And myself and Crackhead Joe were never very tight. I never actually knew this guy's name. Like, Crackhead Joe, I'm pretty sure, is the only name I've ever had for this guy. I don't think I ever knew his name. But nevertheless, he was a very common appearance, a lot more than I talk about in my videos. I know that in the Crackhead Joe video, I went kind of in depth on him, but he was a lot more frequent in my life, and some of you guys may realize, like, it got to the point where, like, I'd chat him up, you know, whenever Ashton was serving, you know, we just kind of talk. I'd ask him, you know, how he liked the drugs he was buying and shit. We'd talk about current events and stuff. He was a very nice guy, but one of the things that I found most interesting about him was how, like, functional he seemed. Out of all the people on these lists, this guy was definitely the most functional. He maintained a job. He had his own apartment. He had a car. Like, this guy lived his own life. He just did a fuckload of drugs. Granted, his TV stand was a milk carton, and his only furniture was a mattress and a folding chair. But honestly, for the amount of drugs this guy did, I'd say that's pretty damn functional. Most of the people who do the amount of drugs that this guy in particular did, they don't even have a car. They don't have a house. But this guy, man, I think I first encountered him right around when I met Ashton, because almost right around when I met Ashton was when I started driving him around to these serves too. And I remember this guy was probably one of the most consistent customers and one of the most memorable. There was a couple other interesting people that Ashton used to serve. There was a couple people who would take the train from, like, out of state even, you know, take the train to the train station in our town just to buy off him, and then, you know, take the train back to Chicago. Or, like, there was one guy who would come from, like, Milwaukee, I think. Like, there was a lot of interesting people. There was some, like, really suave, like, Mexican guy who owned a bar who used to buy coke off him. Like, very interesting people. The Mexican guy who owned the bar, he drove this, like, Mercedes with the blue underglow. Whenever, like, Ashton would open the door when I'd, like, drive him up to the serve, like, the underglow would just flood the park. It was ridiculous. He had some interesting characters, but Crackhead Joe was by far my favorite of all the people that my friend Ashton sold to. And honestly, this crackhead has the second softest spot in my heart. Number 1 goes to Old Folk, who is a legendary character that we'll get to a little later. But the next person I want to talk about in this top 5 crackheads video, number 5, Crackhead Joe. Number 4, let's go way, way back in my videos here. Now, a link to this source is in the description because I bet a lot of you guys don't know who this is. I'm actually pretty certain of it because when I uploaded my first rehab series, there's actually 2 of them. I bet a lot of you guys don't know this. When I uploaded my first rehab series, I had, like, maybe 10K, not even, like 5K subs. So the majority of you guys probably didn't even know that I actually have 2 different rehab series. I've been to rehab twice, but one was a full residential, my longer, more well-known rehab series, which I think collectively has over 1 million views. And then my smaller rehab series, which I would be surprised if collectively even had 100K. There was one particular character who I went to rehab with my first time. It was the psych ward of a hospital. I wouldn't really call it rehab, but at the time when I was young, that was my concept of a rehab center. I was like, oh, this is rehab. Hold on, my cat's scratching at the door, dude. You want to go out, baby? Come here. Go ahead. Go have fun in the hallway. Okay. Well, either way. She was scratching at my door. She wanted to leave. But, all right, so Johnny Jesus was a character who I went to rehab with my first time around when I was in the psych ward. I was maybe like 15 or 16. I don't remember my exact age because this happened a really long time ago. And there was one person who had a room across the hall from me. Each room contained 2 people, right? Same gender, of course. Like I had a roommate, and then across the hall there was this other, room, right? My roommate, I don't remember the fake name I gave him, but it's been so long I doubt his real name matters. His name is Joel. And Joel was a really nice guy. Joel was a funny guy. Across the hall was Johnny Jesus, was the nickname we gave him. At the time, nobody understood like what was going on with him, but through my experiences with other characters and substances, I now understand that he was for sure like paranoid schizophrenic and some sort of manic, like very, very mentally unstable. But when we were younger, we just thought it was drug related. Like we didn't understand much about this guy. Johnny Jesus was a character who believed that he was genuinely sent by God. He was schizophrenic and delusional, and I'm not saying this in a derogatory way. I'm trying to explain what this guy was like, right? Delusional to a point where he actually believed, and he would say this in our group therapy sessions, he believed that he was sent by God to spread the message of the Bible. Like the most extreme case of straight schizophrenia, if that's even the right term for it. I'm not medically qualified to classify this one, but just delusion, the most extreme case I've ever seen. And he was probably the first, I guess you could say crackhead, because he did drugs. As far as I'm aware, he also abused drugs to get in there. Like this rehab wing was not just for mental health. Like there was everyone in there did some sort of substance abuse, right? So like he wasn't completely sober, which was kind of weird to me because you'd think if he was sent by God, he wouldn't do drugs. But no, Johnny Jesus was doing something. I don't really know. But he genuinely believed that he was sent by God, right? So he would go around talking to people, and the only thing you could get him to talk about ever was the Bible. If you would talk to him about God, he would literally preach to you all night if you gave him the chance. But if you talked about Satan in any context, he would literally go into a rage, like a actual tantrum, guys. Something that I've never seen replicated in any other scenario. Like, even when I went to residential rehab, I never saw anybody quite like this. This was maybe even extreme psychosis. I'm not really sure, because the staff there, of course, didn't tell us a ton about him. We didn't learn much from talking to him because he was extremely delusional, right? So I remember my roommate, Joel. He used to stand by the doorway, and he'd talk across the hall to this other kid who was in another room. And he'd be like, oh, yeah, dude, just got done praying to Satan. He said Operation Hellfire's a go for today. And Johnny Jesus would hear this and lose his mind to the point where I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, he even got booty juiced at one point. For those guys who don't know what that term is, basically when you're in a rehab facility and you're acting up and they can't physically restrain you, they will inject you in the ass, hence why it's called booty juice, right in your ass cheek with like a sedative, right? So I'm pretty sure there was one point where they got him so riled up about Satan that they had to booty juice him. But this guy I get asked about a little less frequently, but is a character more so that I felt I should bring more awareness to. For those of you guys who saw my second rehab series, you might like my first one, which I'll have linked in the description. Johnny Jesus is one of the more memorable characters for you OGs out there. And after getting out of rehab, I stayed in touch with Joel a little bit, my roommate. I haven't talked to him in years now. And I tried to get as much info about Johnny Jesus as I could. As far as I remember, and no, I don't think I ever touched on this in the original series, he was getting sent to a residential facility when I got discharged. So as far as I know, all that happened to him is he went to a residential facility, and that was really about it. But he's in the number 4 spot, not necessarily because he was a crackhead, but more because he was honestly one of the most memorable drug-related characters on this channel. And the reason he gets the title of crackhead is because he was in rehab with me. So I think substances might have had something to do with his mental condition. I don't think it's too far-fetched for me to argue that, right? Is that the right word, far-fetched? I don't know. I'm a little bit tipsy. But either way, let's move on to position number 3. Ladies and gentlemen, in position number 3, we are talking about Isaac. Now, for those of you guys who haven't watched my Cocaine Chronicles series, which I assume most of you haven't, might be new viewers, I'll have that linked in the description right by Isaac's name. But basically, Isaac was a good friend of mine who I actually grew up with. I knew him since kindergarten and basically grew up with this kid. We went to the same elementary, middle, high school, and we knew each other for a long time. He was a guy who, during my cocaine binge of last summer, he kind of joined in on the fun for a little bit. And it was all fine and dandy until we found out that he, similar to Johnny Jesus, but not as extreme and in a very different way, was also schizophrenic. I don't remember if it was like paranoid or manic schizophrenic or what. But Isaac, that's not his real name, by the way. I'm not going to use his real name for his own protection. He was a guy who, I hope he's doing well. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but from what I heard, interesting little update on him. I guess you could say interesting. After everything happened to us, I didn't hear from him for a while, right? Nobody really did. And after the Coke Chronicles series ended, I never really provided a status update on Isaac. He ended up doing coke and Molly with me and my friend Kevin and kind of had a mental breakdown where he went into a full psychosis during this series. I'm not going to dive into the whole psychosis because I kind of went through that fairly recently in the Coke Chronicles videos. The reason I went so in depth with Johnny Jesus and I won't with Isaac is because Johnny Jesus, like I said, I talked about him when I had 5K subs. So the vast majority of you guys probably have never heard about that guy. But this right here is something I'm going to touch on a little more lightly, a little less. He basically had a full, psychosis, schizophrenic breakdown because when he was doing these drugs with us, we didn't know, or at least I didn't know, that he was schizophrenic until we were, already well into this binge and, doing drugs with this guy. I wasn't really made aware until it was already very apparent. So by the time he realized it was kind of too late, he was already just out of control. And this breakdown resulted in a total loss of contact with him where I honestly didn't know what happened. I heard rumors, but I didn't know. After speaking to Kevin, who Isaac actually got in touch with, and Isaac's older brother got in touch with, it turns out, as far as I know, now this is through the grapevine, so this is not confirmed, but this is what I've been told happened to him after the Coke Chronicles happened, right? Apparently, this guy ended up going to a mental health facility, kind of like the psych ward I went to in the first rehab series, and ended up, I guess, kind of sobering up and getting some help and getting out of there. And since then, he hasn't really been in touch with anyone in my friend group, which leads me to believe that he's probably sober for the most part, I'd bet, because most of the, listen, if he was hitting someone up for drugs in that area, in my hometown, I probably would have known because I'm friends with most of the people who didn't go to college and still do drugs out there. So, I probably would have heard about it. But everyone I've asked about him has not heard anything from him. I do know that he definitely did get some sort of mental health treatment, though. I'm pretty sure it was some sort of, inpatient or residential facility, but from what I can gather, it sounds like he's doing a lot better. So good for him. Isaac, hope you're doing well. He hasn't spoken to me in however long, but hope he's doing well. Nothing but good wishes for him. The next person, number 2. I think you guys all know that number 1 is old folk, okay? But number 2 is another character who I've only touched on once or twice. And I saw this guy mentioned in the comments of a recent video, and ever since he was mentioned in the comments, Everybody's been asking about him. This character never had a name, and this was another customer of Ashton's, and I believe I talked about this character during a few of my acid trip stories, a few of my older ones. He was an Indian guy, very exciting, and I'm only describing his race and everything to try to maybe give you guys an idea of who he was, because I know I never gave a name to this character, right? We're going to call him, what are we going to call him? Raj. That might have been his real name, actually. That sounds really familiar. That might have been his real name. I don't exactly remember his name. We're going to call him Raj. So Raj, right, is a very common buyer from Ashton. He bought Molly and Xanax, and those are the only two substances that he mainly bought from Ashton. And there was one particular incident where this will probably brush up some of your guys' memory. Ashton pulled up to serve him some Molly. This guy comes running out of his townhouse, his apartment, not apartment, like condo, townhouse kind of thing. Comes running out in the broad daylight in nothing but boxers, even barefoot, not even socks on, dripping sweat, pupils like bowling balls. There's people out walking their dogs, playing with their kids, and this kid comes flying out of his apartment building, sweating balls. Literally, I pop open the back door of the car for him to jump in, and he straight up dolphin dives into the car, sweating all over my backseat to the point where there was a sweat stain. There was a pool of it by the time he got out of the car. He jumps in, he's yelling. He's like, "What's up, guys?" He's like, "What up, boys?" He shakes up with both of us, the most aggressive dap up ever. Literally, bang, that loud. Just the most aggressive dap up ever. And we're like, "Oh, what up, dude?" We're trying to get on his level of hype, and he immediately is just like, "I've been up for 3 days, dude. Xanax and Molly, let me tell you, best combo ever. It's so much fun." And he's just tweaking out. You look at this guy, he looks like a textbook tweaker. His jaw's tweaking the fuck out. He's talking at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But he claimed that he was off Molly and Xans, which is a weird combo. I've never done that before, but he was sweating balls. And this guy, the funniest thing about him, the only reason I mention him in this video, is because I'm pretty sure not only every time I've mentioned him in the past, but every time in general that I've met this guy or encountered him through Ashton, he was fucked up out of his mind. I could not picture this guy sober if someone put a gun to my head. I could not fucking do it. Every single time I encountered this dude, he was zooted out of his mind. Literally out of his mind. Ashton was actually very good friends with this guy. And the last update I have is, of course, from before Ashton passed. So I don't know how he's doing now. But I remember after Ashton moved, we had actually discussed this guy. And one of the things that Ashton said, because I remember I brought him up, I was like, "How is that fucking kid doing?" He came up in conversation when we were talking one day. And I remember Ashton saying that apparently since Ashton moved, the guy couldn't find any drugs. So he kind of sobered up and went back to just smoking weed and drinking and shit. Because after Ashton moved, he didn't have a plug. So I was like, oh, that's a pretty good thing, I guess that's good. But I don't have any crazy updates on him. I more just wanted to touch on that character again because that's another one who I've been getting asked about more frequently as of recent. And now, the number one best crackhead of all time on this channel I've ever encountered in my life. Old Folk. Old Folk is a legend. Old Folk is a character who I don't think I can pinpoint one specific instance where I mentioned him in a video, or one point where he became a star character. Old Folk has always been one of just my favorite people I met through substances ever. For those of you guys who aren't familiar with the tale of Old Folk, allow me to introduce you. Old Folk was a really old guy. That's why we called him Old Folk. We don't know how old he is, but his hair was white and he had a white beard. So the dude was at least maybe 60, minimum 60, 65, visibly old, right? Wrinkled as fuck, just visibly very old, right? And I met him through one of my old high school buddies who I used to do a lot of drugs with, smoke a lot of weed with. And my friend used to sell this guy weed. And I remember the first time I heard about Old Folk, my buddy, we're going to call him Michael. He's like, "Oh yeah, Old Folk's pulling up. I'm going to serve him." I thought Old Folk was just a nickname. But this guy comes riding up on this bike, and it's an old-ass fucking man. It's this 65-year-old man with a little satchel hanging off of his bike, right? And he comes riding up. Michael daps him up. We're all standing in the garage, and this guy's chilling, and he'd just ride up on his bike every time. No matter where we were, he'd ride up. he'd get his weed. He would never have the money up front. He would always tell my friend Michael, he'd be like, man, I don't got the money right now. Let me get the money to you later. I promise I'll be back in 6 hours. He didn't have a phone, so nobody had his phone number, right? So, like, when he said he'd be back, you had to just take his word. Nobody knew where he lived. I had a hunch he was like homeless or maybe living in a car, but I'm not going to give him the label of homeless because I don't know. But old folk, like, just nobody could ever track him. Nobody knew where he was. There's no way to contact him. He was literally like a unicorn. He was like a shiny Pokemon. Like, we'd just be chilling and smoking, and sometimes this old man would just come flying up on a bike and ask us to front him a gram. And every single time he would come back when he said, on the dot. Like, if it was like 11 a.m. and he rolled up and asked, and he said, I'll be back in 6 hours, I swear to God, we would have to be out there at 5 o'clock because at 5:01, old folk is rolling up the driveway with the money. Like, it was amazing how true to his word this guy was. And it was so funny. So even when Michael didn't have weed, like, if we were at the function and old folk rode up, everybody, like, it was just old folk honor. Even if nobody there was selling weed, you have to give him his gram. He never wanted more than a gram, but he'd always come back with the money. So you got to give old folk the gram. So we would always make sure we served him and chatted up with him. And he told this one story. He would probably die on this hill. And honestly, I kind of believe him. He would always pull up and tell this story to every new person at the function who didn't know him. He would talk about how before Muhammad Ali was famous, he was young and he was a boxer. And he sparred with Muhammad Ali and beat him. But then Muhammad Ali got famous. And to this day, I'm pretty sure he takes it to his grave. I haven't seen him in a little while, but I do have an update on him. But to this day, I'm pretty sure this guy takes it to his grave that he would have beaten the hell out of Muhammad Ali if he was in the ring, right? Like, this guy, he was such a character. And the one thing he would always say to us is he'd roll up, and to finish off the conversation, we'd always ask about his government check. He would always tell us that he had a check coming from the government and the feds owed him 30 grand. And he'd been saying this ever since I met him, like for probably 2 to 3 years straight in high school. Every time he'd just be like, man, when that government check come through, y'all got to come to my new place, man. We could smoke some weed. I'll buy you guys some drinks, man. Let's kick it. And we were always like, hell yeah, dude, knowing fully well that the government check is never coming. But we were like, hell yeah, dude, when that Fed check comes, we'll come smoke. As far as I'm aware, this is the only update I have on old folk. There was never a Fed check. And the reason I say this is because I saw him recently at one of my favorite pizza places before I moved away from my hometown about 6 months ago. And then more recently, when I was back home for court, I was actually talking to a couple friends on Snapchat. And I asked them, I was just like, hey, you seen old folk lately? And one of them was actually like, yeah, dude, I saw him at the grocery store. He was with his wife and kids, right? Like, because he always had a wife and kids. That's the thing that led me to believe he might not be homeless. He had a wife and kids, and we'd seen them, like, at the grocery store with him. He was just always on his bike riding around town. But, like, he had a wife and kids, so we never thought he was homeless. But apparently, one of my friends recently saw them at the grocery store and talked to him a little bit and asked about the Fed check, pardon me. And allegedly, the Fed check has still not come through. So, motherfuckers, in the comments, hashtag give old folk the Fed check, dude. Hashtag old folk bailout. I don't know, dude. We need some sort of... Can we contact Nancy Pelosi or Trump or something and get old folk his fucking check finally, dude? It's been like 6 years, bro. Like, can we just get this guy his 30 bands already? He deserves it. But either way, timestamps, once again, are in the description. Wait, it's the end of the video. Why am I even saying that? Nobody cares about timestamps. It's the end. Thank you guys for watching this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Drop a like if you did. I will see you guys next time. Peace.